I'm sure this is going to come as a surprise to some of my readers, but I've never played Dungeons and Dragons. My game in high school was one called Starfleet Battles. I never wanted to be someone else. I just wanted to be me in charge of a fleet of starships with enough firepower to level a continent. As such, I'm not the one to comment on how well this particular movie corresponds to the game. I'll leave that point to others to determine. I no longer play anything. I have considered the idea of dusting off my old rulebooks and using the game as a template to write some stories. I'd need more time for that than my current schedule allows. And then there's the matter of how I handle copyright. Starfleet Battles is partly based on material from the original series of Star Trek, partly based on the Mansion Wars by Larry Niven, and partly on original material created by the staff of Amarillo Design Bureau. Dungeons and Dragons suffers a similar problem. Lots of storytellers like the structure and consistency that game rules provide. When you read a story based on Merlin and King Arthur, you just have to take the author's word that making a bean grow to 3 feet tall is difficult, but growing it to the size of a building is easy. A storyteller is always at liberty to ignore the rules, whether they come from themselves or outside. At least when you're borrowing from an agreed source of rules, your readers know you aren't just making it up as you go along, though. It gives the world of your characters a sense of urgency that you can't get without rules. It's one of the reasons that some people don't like fantasy and science fiction. Whatever the plot demands is possible, whereas if you set the story in the real world, it needs to follow the rules of the real world. One of the problems with setting things in the real world, though, is that everything you do that's fictional is subject to scrutiny. Could Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn really crash their own funeral? How realistic is that? And if we decide that it's not realistic, why is it worse to have no one recognize them, or for 2 teenage boys to fake their deaths, than an invisibility cloak? If we decide that Sherlock Holmes's powers of deduction are just a shade too powerful, how is that worse than a divining rod? One of the problems with using a standard set of rules to govern your world is that it's easy to forget that not everyone knows the rules you've bound your characters to. That was my personal danger entering this movie. I have never played Dungeons and Dragons, so I didn't know the character classes or their abilities. This movie did an excellent job of explaining what each character was capable of, and what they weren't capable of well before it was actually important to the story. It never felt like the solution to a problem just happened. It felt like it was set up so that I as the audience could see how the worst problems were going to be solved by the rules that had already been established. It didn't feel like I was watching someone else's game where they have game lawyered the rules. It felt like a story with a well thought out plot containing a good beginning, middle, and end. That's why I can say that I highly recommend this movie.